before we get started with the presentation, I just want to plug our May social event. UT-ITE will be hosting a pool night at Rivoli in 2 weeks' time. It should be a good time, lots of food, lots of drinks, and we hope to see you there. And I'll hand it to Sina. He's an MASC candidate with Professor Habib, and he'll be discussing accessibility concerns with automated vehicles. And I'll leave it to that.
Hello, everyone. As most of you might know, we are investigating the impact of connected autonomous vehicles on pedestrians with visual impairment. And before we started to focus on our target population, we did some literature review on the general mobility issues of vulnerable road users. The question here is that who are actually vulnerable road users? According to the World Health Organization, pedestrians, children, cyclists, and in general, road users at most risk are involved in this category. And I just put some facts and highlights from literature here. For instance, according to the Stat Canada, around 18% of accident fatalities involved pedestrian only in 2016. And also, you can imagine that there are a lot of research on this topic. And for instance, Terry et al. Tried to match the crash data with real-time information about the from the mounted camera on traffic lights and try to mitigate the risk of accident for vulnerable road users, as well as there are lots of literature on the accessibility issues of general disabled people. For instance, Jacobs investigated the impact of the transportation accessibility issues for disabled people in Canada from 1976 to 2016. The key findings from this specific study is that lack of enough legislation support as well as poor transit and paratransit systems impact their overall quality of life of disabled people in Canada. The solution for these specific accessibility issues could be the new Accessibility Act in Canada, Bill C-81, that was developed last year, and they tried to modify the accessibility for 5 different categories: customer service, employment, information and communication, transportation, and design of public spaces. There are, for our interest, transportation part is important for us, and that, for instance, there are some parallel works to this new Accessibility Act that one of them is done by the Transport Standards Development Committee in Canada, and the other is Accessibility for Ontario and Disabilities Act. That the good point here is that they discussed about the noise reduction of electric vehicles and possible issues of autonomous vehicles and in terms of quiet operating of these vehicles. But in the negative point of view is that they couldn't define any standards or guidelines for proposing in this new Accessibility Act. So for the next step in our literature review, we did some investigation on ITS application for improving the mobility issues of vulnerable road users. I just put some highlights again from literature here. For instance, Mans et al. Did a qualitative analysis on different in European countries based on the policy recommendation of improving mobility of vulnerable users via ITS and deployment, and other studies, Marginal et al., that they investigate, they propose different interfaces for communication between autonomous vehicles and pedestrians. They develop different scenarios for that, and overall the key findings for this specific study is that the combination of visual aids, auditory feedbacks, and also physical cues such as haptic devices could provide better communication between pedestrians and connected vehicles. And the more relevant study to our project is done by Rasuli and Azizisoldouz, that they did a broad literature review on different communication techniques between pedestrians and autonomous vehicles. And the interesting point of here is that most of them focused on the visual road users. Sorry, most of them focused on general sighted pedestrians. And we thought that it would be better, for instance, to show you a couple of videos to better understand the mobility issues of blind people. In this video. Yes. For this video, you can see that there are three different scenarios between communication between the pedestrian and the vehicle. For the first scenario, the hybrid vehicle is on gasoline mode, and pedestrian can hear the engine noise, so the driver is stopped for her, and she crossed the road safely. In the second scenario, the vehicle is on electric mode, so the pedestrian couldn't hear the engine noise, and the driver and pedestrian both are confused that which one crossed the road first. You can see here that, for instance, because of the lack of noise from engine, both of them are confused now. And in the last scenario, we will see that there is an application of beacon system that use the pedestrian just alert the driver that she wants to cross the road. So both of them get notified that, for instance, you can see here that the driver get notification that she wants to cross the street, so the driver is stopped for her. In the second video, it's right. Oh. It's better, I guess, to just mention what can be good. Yes. Perfect. For the I have it, but
just open the video data. Yeah, just close the slideshow, open the video from the folder. okay. It's okay. He will on the phone.
Sina, do you have the videos here?
Sorry about the... So in this video, you can see that there is a free application called CNIB. It's developed by Microsoft. It scans everything for them, read, for instance, documents for them, read the products in the stores, and even it tells them about the people in front of them. And it is interesting that this application can be applied to other smart devices such as smart glasses, such as eSight and ARA. These glasses almost do similar things that scan and also read everything for them. The issue with these two glasses is that the cost at first, for instance, eSight is cost around $10,000, and ARA is around $2,500 annual cost, because it's the difference between ARA and eSight is that ARA is connected to the third party, and an agent just tells everything to the user. And for the last video, I hope that it works. For the last video, I just want to show you another application of the beacon system that it's applied to the accessible pedestrian signals. And you can see that, for instance, the user just push the button, and it's, for instance, announced to the user that when it's safe to cross the street. It has benefits for non-user as well, because it just mitigates the noise of accessible pedestrian signals, sounds for the neighborhoods. And overall, I want to mention that in general, there are two different categories for application and tools that can improve the mobility of this community. There are infrastructure dependent and infrastructure independent tools and application. For just want to mention the last one, hypothetical, and they designed an Android application which is modified the accuracy of GPS system for pedestrians, as well as it connects to the traffic lights for getting the direction to the user. And for our research, as I mentioned earlier, most of the studies for communication technique between pedestrians and autonomous vehicles are highly focused on visual or sighted people. So we wanted to capture the gap in the research, and also our goal is that to try to match the best practices for communication techniques that can be used both by general sighted people and also with visual impairment. For the methodology, we used Survey Gizmo platform. Our partnership was Canadian National Institute for the Blind. That this project is proposed by them to the Transport Canada and is partially cited by them, partially funded by them. And for the Survey Gizmo platform, it is supposed to be the most accessible survey platform in the market. However, we face a lot of difficulties for different type of accessibility issues. For instance, some of the screen readers as well as some of the iOS devices couldn't work with the Survey Gizmo. And for the data collection, CNIB was responsible for collecting the data. Unfortunately, they only used social media for our project. However, the reason for that is that they had to launch several surveys at the same time, so they chose to only use social media for collecting the data. just put this slide to show you the structure of our survey. We first start with asking questions about the location and also their experience with site loss. In the next step, we ask some question about the different technologies and tools they use on daily basis for navigation and also different purposes. And in the next section, we ask them about, we develop some hypothetical scenarios regarding communication between connected vehicles. And finally, we ask some demographic questions. Overall, we received around 400 responses inside and outside of Canada, and among them, around half of them are from inside of Canada and almost half of them from outside of Canada. This is another information that's interesting for us, that we received. Most of the responses are from Ontario and British Columbia. We want to compare it for the estimated population from the CNIB to see how representative is our data set. As you can see, for the Ontario and British Columbia, our data set is a little overrepresented compared to the Quebec. Even we have the French version for our survey. We didn't receive a lot of responses from the French version. For the age distribution, you can see that we have received almost similar distribution for both inside of Canada and outside of Canada. Again, we want to compare it for the estimated population from the CNIB. We found that the our data set is overrepresented for younger generation. It has positive and negative points for us, because, for instance, we probably younger generation are the user of this system. On the other hand, in terms of the statistic point of view, our survey is not acceptable for in terms of age distribution for inside of Canada. And this one is another distribution for gender distribution, and as you can see, almost half of responses for Canada are male and female, and for the severity of site loss, both inside of and outside of Canada, we have received most of the respondents are significant, has significant sight loss or totally blind. Interestingly, before we launched the survey for the US, the travel mode choice was balanced between the car and transit systems. However, after we launched the survey for US, we received that, for instance, most of the respondents, it is acceptable that most of the responses increase the travel frequency by car. For the level of education, interestingly, we found that most of the respondents are highly educated, as well as the distribution between the employment status. Most of them are fully employed and or student. For the modeling, we use factor analysis for developing latent factors to structural equation modeling. We found two specific latent factors. One is safety and security, the other one is importance of hearing. For the safety and security, we found that most of the questions related to the safety issues of connected vehicles, and also opinions questions related, for instance, to how they want to communicate with these vehicles are statistically significant. On the other hand, for the importance of hearing, mostly demographic information are statistically significant. And at the bottom, you can see our two dependent variables. One is trust to connected vehicles, the other one is preference of using connected vehicles. For both of them, we received almost similar results. We did the same scenario for outside of Canada. We almost achieved same results. for what we want to mention here is that, for instance, for one variable, for one specific variable, their previous experience with electric vehicles highly affect their trust and preference of using connected vehicles. For instance, for a respondent that they had, was near accident with electric vehicles, they are less likely to communicate with this sort of technology. And as I mentioned, we did same scenario for outside of Canada data set. And for the next step, we developed or the Logit model for our two dependent variables. One is preference of using connected vehicles, the other is trust in connected vehicle. For this slide, I just want to show you a couple of examples that how the different variables impact their preference of using connected vehicles. For instance, we found that people who choose to use devices that is not connected to the third party, or people who prefer to communicate with not communicate with connected vehicles and get the notification or some alerts from infrastructure, or for instance, more likely to use these vehicles. Or another example is related to the level of education and age. For instance, we found that as much as the age increased, the preference for using, or as much as the level of education increased, the preference of using change. And also, as I mentioned, similar result from the structural equation modeling for accident. Previous experience to be near an accident with electric vehicles impact negatively on their preference for using this technology. And for the trust dependent variable, we found almost similar result. For instance, we found that people who are more than 65 or people who have better access to transit system are more likely to trust these vehicles. And for other example, I just want to mention here, for instance, the using of applications and smart devices for navigation techniques. People who use different sort of application and tools for navigation are more likely to trust these vehicles compared to people who use traditional methods such as white cane or guide for instance, navigation. And as I mentioned, we did similar scenarios for outside Canada data set as well. And for comparison of the result between the data set of Canada and outside of Canada, I just want to mention that we get similar result almost for most of the parameters except for instance orientation and mobility tape usage. For instance, we found that in Canada, orientation and mobility tech uses that the programs from orientation and mobility that they use technology in their programs are for instance, impact positively for outside of Canada that they more prefer to use in these vehicles if they previously get the orientation and mobility programs with the technology. And I just put this slide to show you some of the anecdotal opinions. Interestingly, we received small sample size, but interestingly, there are various opinions about this technology from most negative to most positive. Now, for instance, you can see that they mentioned highly that the quiet impact of connected vehicles is very important for them. Or on the other hand, we have received some comments and opinions that they don't have any concern about using these vehicles. And for the policy recommendation, as I mentioned, we try to find the best practices and try to match it with the result we get from the data set. As for instance, we want to propose it for instance, in terms of orientation and mobility programs. Governments can subsidize these programs by improving their accessibility to different type of technologies, and as well as for subsidizing affordable and carry-aware devices, such as I mentioned for the study done by Fosseli et al. That they developed an application for using for devices instead of only focusing on improving infrastructure. And for another policy would be the combination of different sorts of, for instance, application from infrastructure and also from different smart devices and tools that could be used by this community as well as used by sighted people. And for the key point from our study, I just want to mention that interestingly, more than 90% of the respondents use a smartphone on daily basis. But based on the results, it is not necessarily say that they will use this, for instance, technology, or they use different type of application and devices for their navigation, but it is not necessarily say us that if they use these technologies for their navigation, they will be the user of the connected vehicles. And for the electric vehicle, as I mentioned, there is an issue that there is some misunderstanding between the electric vehicles based on some opinions we have received, based on the operation of the electric vehicles and connected vehicles. There are some misunderstanding that some of them thought that these are similar vehicles, but again, for the policy recommendation, we can propose that the education programs for improving the knowledge about these vehicles could be improved and fill this gap, and also for the standards and legislation, because it is still in hypothetical phase. We cannot say that any specific standards or any specific guideline for using by Transport Canada or other governmental institution or non-governmental institution that they can use the specific guidelines or standards for improving the mobility of this community. I guess that's it. Thank you for your attention.
Question for Sina. When you go back to your marginal effect table, you show a 3D table. Difficult to understand. So do you have the tables, numerical tables, and you have a question numerical table as well? So this table is much better than 2D. So what is the dependent variable here?
It's the preference of using.
Preference of using
Connected.
Explain a little bit more of the device to 3D option. The number 6 row.
For instance, it's a scenario that they want to communicate with connected vehicles, that the devices is not connected to the third party. In the
Least preferred.
It's kind of listed.
What do you mean by accident EV?
The experience, as I mentioned, for instance, if they have the being, for instance, near an accident in the vehicle.
Did they have an experience of having an accident in EV?
Right. Not exactly experience being, for instance, near an accident.
Near it. First column is not preferred at all.
there.
positive side, that's saying this.
Sure, it's not representative.
The level of blindness is the first variable, totally blind.
Right.
Any question for Sina?
So what sort of help did people have in filling the survey who couldn't see? Some of them are totally blind or visually impaired. Do they have some sort of audio survey or somehow they would indicate?
How do
How did they complete it?
complete this?
Yeah.
There are different types of screen readers that they use. For instance, it's kind of announce the page or whatever they open. For instance, I use some of the free version of them. That it said that, for instance, this is the web browser, this is the link, and it's read everything for you from the respondent. And they use keyboards or, for instance, different shortcut for them for using keyboards that they just read the page for them and they just interact with them.
So there are different type of readers, blind people. All of our participants are blind. So there are different level of blindness out there. They use smart devices that read the survey to them and listen to their answer and that giving to them. And the survey gives well now that is one of the commercial software.
And the popular one is done is based on the iOS system. It's voiceover. It's very popular with why not? They can use both on, for instance, smartphones and also.
I really like the idea of having, in your recommendation, having subsidies, government subsidies for this kind of program. But do you know, like, if we give subsidies for electric vehicles, we should also give subsidies for these devices for like vulnerable. But do you have any idea of how many people we have in Canada, Ontario, that are like need that devices?
Interestingly, CNIB just have estimated population in Canada, around 500 people they estimated are 5,000. There are 500,000.
Have the visual
Only
impairment.
And most of them don't have access to smart devices, just a smartphone. They have some donation program that just collect, use the smartphone in improving the access. In terms of connected vehicles, I hope that it's very basic that most of them doesn't have access to smart devices, as well as most of them doesn't live in remote areas. For instance, they don't have access to transit or paratransit systems. So
We do have an income question in your survey.
income, actually, we had it, but our collaboration with CNIB, we mentioned that they are not, because most of them, according to the study, Canada, are involved in low income.
Very low income category. That's a very good question. So the whole survey was in collaboration with CNIB, funded by Transport Canada. So idea was with new technologies coming in, it's not feasible to design the system for such a niche group. Right? Find out the policy that's most cost effective and also effective in terms of music, right? So that the policy can subsidize those things and make them non-vulnerable. So we wanted to know the income and have a sense of like whether they have capability of purchasing that type of device or not. So CNIB's the opinion is that majority of them are in the very low income category So either they will be sensitive to reporting it or they will access the activities. So we didn't end up collecting it.
I apologize for being late. I might have missed something important. I have two questions. There seems to be a confounding between electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles. We all know why we want them all to be the same and why we want both, I understand. The only place where there's a crossover that matters to, I think, blindness, is the fact that the machines are very quiet. I understand it's a very big issue. You can't hear it because you're depending on it. But there's also, it seems to be some collapse of understanding of the difference between them and how they had an accident before with EV. The accident with EV could have been an accident with an ICE. It just was an accident with a vehicle. So why did you bring them both? Why did you bring both EV and AV in terms of a preference? Because it's an accessibility issue, and EV, ICE doesn't change accessibility, but AV does. That's the difference. So how would that get controlled?
For the first part, we only have the scenario for connected vehicles, but because they have, if they want to have more realistic scenarios, because already some of them communicate with electric vehicles. They had issues with electric vehicles. They just want to kind of provide similar issues with the quiet impact of electric vehicles and compare it to connected vehicles.
No, okay, of course I can see that. We can learn from that for sure.
That's a very good point that you mentioned. There has been confounding issues out there. So EV is not an option there. We looked at the factors with experience with EV to see if they have a different perception about new technologies or not. I
can see that crossover as well. Now, my second question is, you just talk about CAV, which I think, forget to connect AV. But that's, when you talk about income and can they afford it, there's an
No, it's not affording the AV. It's affording the devices to navigate in the network. Like blind people could use different technologies, and some of these technologies are quite expensive. Like Sina mentioned, one of the, what is it called?
eSight.
They were like $2,700 per year subscription fee for them. So that the affordability comes from that point of view. Can they afford devices or technology that will help them navigate in the system in a safe way? It's not about the affordability.
Was there any understanding or any thought at all that there would be a fleet of robo taxis that could be hailed with these devices? And I understand the device problem, but there's the concept of, well, we will buy one for our daughter who's blind because we can afford it, or we can't afford it and we can use robo taxis, but we can't afford the device. So there's a complexity around ownership of vehicles. So
Yeah.
I'm not saying that this is not an easy problem.
It's not an easy.
So was there any thought about that?
We thought about that one, but we didn't want to go that far details in this first survey. So this whole survey was objective to the understanding of their perspective, blind people's perspective about AV and their experience on EV kind of thing. There will be hopefully a follow-up project on it where we can get deeper into it.
I want to make this is really, really important work for another reason. It's probably the case that our first fleets of autonomous vehicles will be constrained to spatially constrained. So
Yeah.
they won't be, no one will buy a vehicle that you can only take to certain places. So they'll be mostly robotic taxis in the first decade. So we're talking between now and 2030. And the understanding by many people is it's a huge, huge value for the mobility disadvantage, of which on-site people are one, an example of mobility disadvantage. So it's very, very important we get all these things right. So I'm complimenting you on this kind of work. It's very important to get all these things right for this first decade in which all there will be is robotaxis, which will be shunned by people that like to own their own car because they're just going to get partial automated vehicles. So what this will be left for is for the mobility disadvantage. This is very rare. So thank you.
Okay? All right, thank you.